sources in the United States and other parts of the world, debates in the last month or so on the future of nuclear energy, and a host of other energy-related topics. We are really pleased that we've put together an excellent group to talk about pipelines and pipe dreams. I'm not quite sure who came up with the title, but it's creative. And I'd like to invite our moderator, Dr. Sylke Tempel, editor of International Politik.
Hi.
Yep. Hi.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you. And
hello.
Bring out our panelists.
Yes. Thank you very much. I'm always impressed about these quick changes of infrastructure here. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm Sylke Tempel. I'm editor of Internationale Politik. And after we've been hearing so charmingly how charmed Tom Stoppart's life has been, we'll stay for a moment in the realm of magic, in the sense that while alchemists in the medieval times were looking for the magic formula of making gold, we are obviously looking for the magic formula for energy. Energy has to be there in huge supplies, preferably from nice partners and suppliers and not troublemakers. They have to be shipped in a way that's sustainable. They have to be cheap. They have to be sufficient. Sufficient for the industrialized countries, but preferably also for the emerging countries. And then on the consumer's bill, they also have to come cheap. As you can say, this might be that might be achieved just as successfully as the magic formula for gold. The great thing about the Brussels Forum is that not only do you get an impression with the topics of the panels on what are really the hot topics that we are discussing, but they're all interconnected. This morning I've been to the session on the fossil-free future of energy, and it was quite interesting. It was very interesting indeed, because basically what you get is in the energy mix of the magic formula of energy, on the question of nuclear energy, you get, especially in these days, some precautions. We might not look, but we are not quite sure yet, but we might not look in such a glorious future of nuclear energy. When it comes to renewable energy, the answer that you're getting for quite some time is it's very promising. It might be someday just as cheap as fossil fuels, but actually the magic word here is not yet. We are there, not yet. So that means that from the realm of technological innovations in the late 20th and 21st century, we basically go back a bit into the realm of politics and power politics, which is very much 19th century. And this is why this panel has been so aptly called Pipelines, Politics, and Pipe Dreams. I'm very pleased to introduce the panelists to you. And if you compare this with the little leaflets that you get here, I can assure you, you do not have a vision. You do not have to go see an eye doctor. There are really 4 people here I'm really very pleased to introduce. To the very left, Ambassador Richard Jones, who's been ambassador to Israel and Lebanon, not very resource-rich country, troublesome, however, and to Kazakhstan and Kuwait, very resource-rich, I'd say, and who is, since 2008, Deputy Director of the International Energy Agency. We have here, and I'm very pleased to greet you here on the panel, Iain Conn, who is the Chief Executive of Refining and Marketing of BP. Welcome. To his left, Ivan Krastev, who you might also see in a panel tomorrow, right? You're a multitasker. From Bulgaria, and you are the chair of the board, program director of political planning, of political research at the Center for Liberal Strategies. And last but really not least, well, actually, the Romanian president, Băsescu, had to obviously answer his BlackBerry and to go back to Bucharest. But I'm very pleased to greet Leonard Orban, who is the personal advisor of the Romanian president. Welcome here to this panel. I've been mentioning this panel this morning already about fossil fuel energy, and as it so happened, we were talking about fossil fuels at some point, namely when it was mentioned that we might be, when we look into a low-carbon energy future, and in the restraints that we have when it comes to renewable energies, that we might be talking about a golden age of natural gas. And I'd like to re-quote this here because it's very important for this panel. And I would like to ask you, Ambassador Jones, if we assume that this is so, is the European Union taking the right precautions to also secure supplies, taking into consideration that in 20 years from now we might be dependent on energy imports in this sector, and they might reach a level of 70% of energy imports? Do we take the right precautions here?
Well, that's a very provocative question. I'll
I hope so.
I'll try and give a non-provocative answer. But I think we need first to think about why energy is so important. And in many cases, energy is an intangible. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't touch it. In fact, if you tried to, it would be a shocking experience, perhaps. But yet, energy is so important. It's really, energy is life. We need energy to live from our food. Our economies need energy to function. So the quest for energy, I think, is something that humans will always be obsessed with. And, of course, it's a very topical issue now, given the disruption in energy supplies that have taken place, whether due to political events in Libya and North Africa or to natural events in Japan. So energy security is very much on our minds today. And I think in Europe, it's been on your mind for several years, particularly you mentioned natural gas, because of the shutdowns in the supply of natural gas, which have occurred in 2006 and 2009 because of political disputes unrelated to Europe, in fact. And so your question's a timely one. But I believe, actually, that Europe is moving in the right direction. There's a question, perhaps, if whether or not it's moving fast enough. But just a few years ago, in the case of natural gas in particular, Europe was dependent 90% on 3 countries. Now your dependency on those countries is down to about 79%. It's still very high, but at least you're moving in the right direction. So Europe is diversifying. And I think that's one of the key words that we should bear in mind as we talk about energy security is diversification. Because any supply can be disrupted, no matter how stable it is, that we think it is, no matter how good the political relations are. The fact of the matter is, as we've seen, a variety of events can occur, whether natural or political or security, that can disrupt energy supplies. So the best thing that we can do as societies is diversify the mix of energy that we use and diversify the routes by which we get it. And Europe is doing that. Can it do more? Certainly. Any country can do more. What's interesting to me is that, in fact, you're seeing in Europe, Europe is not it's not a homogeneous whole. There are differences in connectivity in Europe, within Europe. So, for example, you mentioned the natural gas as a possible revolution.
Especially, yeah.
And in the United States, there's been the development of so-called unconventional gas, which has led to...
We might come to the unconventional gas section later.
Okay,
though, yeah.
just to finish up, that's led to very marked shifts in prices. And you've seen shifts in prices in Europe as well as a result. But what's interesting is you don't see the same price shifts within Europe. And why don't you see that? Is because the other thing that's very important for security is markets. And in Europe, you do not yet have unified markets for energy. You don't have a unified electricity market. You don't have a unified natural gas market. In order to have unified markets, you need regulatory reform, and you also need to build interconnections so that you can ship these products around. Thank you.
Within Europe, but then, of course, the whole idea about diversification is, especially when we're talking about natural gas, and we've seen the maps coming up just a second ago, it's the pipeline thing. It's really the pipeline thing and how we connect those places where we get the supply, where we get the supply from.
That's the point. Is that there are many options. And Europe has increased its diversification through pipelines, and I'm certainly, and the International Energy Agency certainly favors pipelines. But in natural gas, increasingly, the world is looking at trade in liquefied natural gas.
Yeah.
And that gives you tremendous diversification. If you can move the natural gas from the ports where it's regasified to the markets. And that means, yes, pipelines, but pipelines not only coming to Europe, but within Europe.
Thank you. I would like to stay with the keyword of diversification for a moment, because we've been given this keyword, and that might be an odd question to you, Mr. Conn. I'll ask it anyway. A few months ago, I think Ed Markey, not very charmingly, I have to say, called British Petroleum Bolshoi Petroleum because of the swaps you were doing with Transneft, right? And I would like to ask you really about. When we talk diversification, it's two levels. It's technological diversification, it's looking at different means of transporting natural gas into Europe specifically, but it's also about diversification of countries. I mean, we can name it right away, all the Southern Corridor, most of the Southern Corridor projects about diversification. What reasons do you see for diversification of countries? I mean, should we rely on Russia that much? Just to ask it plainly.
Well, Sylke, let me come to Russia in just a second. I just want to agree with some of the things that the ambassador said. That firstly, we've got to ask ourselves, what's the problem we're trying to solve? We're trying to solve a problem of safe, secure, affordable, and energy and climate change. That's what we're trying to solve. And we thought we were on a path to do that. Choice is key to security. Choice of what energy, where you get it from, and who you get it from. And I'll come back to your point. What I think people forget to realize is that the key issue today is energy for power and heat. Transport's relatively resolved. It'll take a long time to go to electric vehicles, but actually transport is a very small piece of the climate change puzzle, and actually it also is in a situation where oil is relatively in plentiful supply. The big issue is power and heat, and I would put to the audience that, as you've said, and as Dick's just said, natural gas is critical to this, and the other thing that's critical to this, and I'm not involved in it, is nuclear. And I think we are going to have to continue with the nuclear journey unless we want to change the equation. Now to your question. Energy diversification is absolutely fundamental to security. Europe has 4 main routes for supply of natural gas. Russia, which takes 20 to 25% of Europe's supply today, rather higher proportion of the imports. The North Sea, which is declining but a secure source of natural gas. North Africa, which has now got some rather significant challenges and certainly worrying people about the security there, and liquefied natural gas, which is expanding. And the 5th, which we definitely need to open, is the Caspian and Middle East, because the geopolitics needs to be diversified as well as the pipelines. However, to your point about Russia, we are plumbed in to Russia, as this map that's just popped up again shows. We are inextricably linked. The molecules from Russia come to your cookers, and once you've got pipelines built, and there's mutual interest in supply and demand, those pipelines will be kept full. Russia has supplied Europe reliably all the way through the Cold War, and it's in Russia's interest to keep doing so. It's also in Europe's interest to keep taking gas from Russia. Russia will, by 2030, still have about 25% of our gas. I think it is absolutely wise to be taking gas from Russia. I think we have no choice in our dealings with Russia except to engage with Russia, co-invest with Russia, and recognize that mutuality, because there are new forces at play. The Chinese are looking at natural gas resources as far afield as the Caspian, and everyone in this room that thinks that all the Caspian's gas is automatically going to come west needs to think hard. So we need Russia, and I think we should absolutely continue to embrace and invest in and with Russia.
You are not, if you allow me the second question, you're not troubled at all by recent not-so-nice experiences in Russia with your president right now?
We've had a few bumps. But let me...
Bumps. Oh, that's a charming way of putting it.
Well,
yeah.
Well, actually, I seriously do want to point out one thing. We put $9 billion into Russia. We've had $15 billion out. Our current interest is worth $25 billion. We have found that you can do business in Russia. It helps if you're big. But you can do business in and with Russia, and we believe we will resolve any current issues that we have. I'm happy to expand on them later, but I don't have any concerns. We have a very strong relationship with the Russian state, and I think Europe needs to strengthen its relationship with the Russian state.
I'd like to, we are right there, and I'd like to pass this on to Ivan Krastev. Ivan, coming from Bulgaria, and Bulgaria being one of those European countries that does not like the idea too much to be too dependent on Russian supplies, how would you look at the issue of opening a southern corridor without Russia, which is basically much of what Nabucco is about, or with Russia, which goes into the South Stream discussion a bit? What is your take on that?
Let's first start with the disclosure. I'm one of the person who is not expert here, and only GMF knows why.
Don't say that. So
no, but this is important because I do believe that there is, first of all, country like Bulgaria, West, they know this. Listen, nobody wants to be a transition country anymore. The dream is to be a transit country. When you see maps here, basically people are
perhaps we should have transit country partnerships with North Africa.
People basically like maps. But my analysis, and also on this type of dependency, as you know, Bulgarian dependency is very high. We're talking not only about gas, we're talking about oil, and now we're talking about a project for the construction of the new nuclear plant on the Russian technologies. So from this point of view, Bulgarian way of diversification is a very specific one. We're diversifying Russia with Russia. What I want to make a point is, and for me, being much more of a political scientist than a specialist on energy, something important is happening here, and even in the way we're talking today. There are three things that are changing. One is financial austerity. Everybody talks about these projects. How much money are there? And all these projects you're reading day by day, and they're telling you that they're becoming more and more expensive. Secondly, stability. Everybody is saying this is stable, that is stable. I do believe, and Professor Rothfeld made this point also yesterday, we are living in a world where there is no stability anymore. How stable is Central Asia? Honestly speaking, demographically and politically, Central Asia shares some of the major characteristics of the Middle Eastern regimes that collapsed, even worse. And thirdly, you have a publics that have a very high expectations concerning security. Basically, you have a risk-averse publics, which are very moody. And even you can see a very serious country like Germany, with a very serious government which overnight is changing their nuclear policy because of the public sentiment. And for me, the major question is how you're making a security policy that is long-term and effective in these conditions. To answer your question, what Bulgaria learned in 2009 and 2006. As you know, Bulgaria and Slovakia have been one of the two countries most hurt by the Russia-Ukrainian dispute, let's put it on this. We learned that the basic problem is not to try to convince Russia or Ukraine to do things that they're not going to do anyway, but to try to go with this connectivity and giving a basically common network of pipelines between European countries. Because everybody likes interdependency, but we have now asymmetrical interdependency. This is the major problem. Countries like Bulgaria cannot stay without gas or oil for a long period of time. There was gas and oil in Turkey and Greece. We cannot get them, because we don't have these 60 kilometers that are connecting the countries. And this does not depend on Russia. That does not depend on Mr. Putin. We can do it. But we're so much obsessed with the bigger maps that I don't believe that we're doing enough the small things that depends totally on us. And talking about, of course, fascination with maps and gas is not only the fascination of small countries. Professor Inozentsev yesterday gave me a figure which probably you're going to enjoy. In 2009, out of all meetings of Mr. Putin, 86% of them, according to the official informations, were connected with gas. At the same time, only 13% of Russian export is gas.
I just want a quick follow-up then, just to break it down to a very specific project, namely Nabucco. Some observers had said about Nabucco, no money, no supply, no demand. You would add no security either? Or is this a wrong assessment?
I'm not a specialist on Nabucco. So from this point of view, I don't want to make a statement basically based on what I have read in the papers. The problem with Nabucco, from my point of view, is the following. European Union invested too much of its symbolic credibility in the Nabucco project. European Union was telling how important Nabucco is. I don't know is Nabucco a good project or bad project. And by the way, I don't know the same about South Stream. But if Nabucco is going to fail, from the point of view of the voters, European Union does not look very seriously. And what we have at the moment is a talk about a common energy policy, but when it comes to pipeline, the pipelines are national strategies, not a European strategy.
I would like to add another element into this discussion, Leonard, Orban, and that has to do a bit with technology and how it can influence markets. It has been mentioned before, namely shale gas, unconventional gas, which is extracted from rocky material by pushing a lot of water into together with some chemistry. What happened in the US was that shale gas really sort of gave a push to the markets, also helped to reduce prices on the international market, and opened up more supplies on the liquefied natural gas market. Now there have been some obviously supplies discovered in Romania on shale gas. Do you see in this kind of technology something that could be changing the picture in the field of natural gas, especially when it comes to Romania?
I think that we will see some changes, but only on long term. So on medium term, on short and medium term, I don't think there will be remarkable achievements from this point of view. So, but on long term, of course, there will be significant changes. But let me say a few words about what was discussed before, about the idea of creating a really integrating, functioning internal market in the European Union. I think this is the key issue for not only for the Union, but also for the countries in the neighborhood of the Union. I remember that when it was the last crisis in 2009, it was impossible for Romania to help Bulgaria, simply because interconnection didn't exist at that time. Now, because of the EU recovery plan, we are very advanced, and soon, I think no later than the beginning of next year, the interconnection between Romania and Bulgaria will be achieved. Already the interconnection between Romania and Hungary is a reality today. It's between Arad and Szeged. This has been achieved at the beginning of this year. So I think we can do a lot in terms of building strong relations and, of course, interconnection among the different member states. I think this is a prerequisite for a fully functioning internal market. Because as a former EU commissioner, being part and different in the launching of different initiatives, I remember that when I assist my first meeting as commissioner in the college, the Commission adopted a very ambitious package on energy and climate change. Of course, in the meantime, several other initiatives were launched, but however, it was one of the most important initiatives. I know how difficult it is to achieve this objective, to have a really integrated internal market of the Union. We are still far away from this objective. But also, and I will conclude with this, I think in terms of diversification, I think that Nabucco is an important project. The European Union has invested a lot in this project. I remember that at the beginning of this year, the President of the European Commission paid a visit to Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan. I think it's with very welcoming results. And I think that we are closer to, let's say, a really important start an important start in this project. But there are also other projects. Let me give you just one example.
Perhaps we can come back to that later.
Okay.
Because I'm sure there will be burning questions in the audience already. The rules are of course known. Please introduce yourself quickly, and perhaps it also helps. There is a gentleman over here. If you'd ask your question to one of the panelists directly. Could a microphone? Where are the microphones actually? Here. Could you go over here? Thanks.
Steve Larrabee, the RAND Corporation. Ivan Krastev and the Romanian representative have said the EU has invested a lot in Nabucco. I would challenge that. I think the main problem is that they've talked a lot about it, but in fact they've done very little. This is a project that's been talked about and been going on for 10 years. And if you compare that to what was mentioned, how the Chinese have acted, where in a very short period of time you had the important building of the Chinese Central Asian pipeline, where the Chinese were willing to invest their own money to see that the pipeline was built, and this has had a potentially very important impact on the energy situation. The EU has put very little money, a few $100 million perhaps, into it, but over a period of 10 years. And we still don't know whether there are going to be enough suppliers to make it viable.
So your question is that you doubt that the project
yes,
will
I'd
be
like
followed through?
I challenge that in fact the EU really has done very much. The problem is just the opposite. They've talked about it, but they have done, in fact, very little.
Thank you. Would you like to go first, Mr.? Well, we then go through all the panel.
Of course, at the beginning there were many discussions. There were different opinions at the community level, because we have to look at the union from two different angles. The first one at the community level, there was always a full support for this project, and I know very well because I was commissioner. On the other hand, there were at the level of member states different opinion about this. But this is no longer the situation. I think, once again, after the visit of the President Barroso in Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan, there are concrete results, concrete commitment, especially at the Azerbaijan side. And now I think it's the good moment to really start to implement this project. From this point of view, there is full support from our side, from the Romanian side, and we are convinced that, let's say, on medium term, this can be an extremely useful project answering to this demand of increasing the energy security for the whole Union, not only for one region, but for the whole Union.
Mr. Conn, you also wanted to follow up on this?
Well, I do. Look, I feel I've got to digress into a few facts for a second. I mean, the first thing is, why do pipelines get built? They get built because there's enough resource at one end and enough market at the other. Now, that may sound silly, but it's true. That determines when they get built and how big they are. Now, there is enough gas in the Caspian to build a pipeline to Europe. BP operates it. There's 16 billion cubic meters per annum ready to come in the next phase. 6 going into Turkey and staying there, because Turkey's got a lot of demand, which is actually why this pipeline is going to go through Turkey anyway, because there's already a pipeline to the Turkish border, and Turkey needs some gas. And there's 10 BCMA more that's going to come into Europe. So I'm highly confident that a pipeline will be built. However, we've got to stop being preoccupied by the word Nabucco. There are 3 pipelines competing to build the line. That should give us all lots of confidence a pipeline will be built. The idea of hitching yourself to one line and a really big line, Nabucco is supposed to be 31 billion cubic meters per annum of gas. Small problem, there isn't 31 billion cubic meters per annum of gas. So unless the European Union is prepared to underwrite the extra capacity, you can forget a 30 BCMA line. However, please don't think everything is disastrous as a result. Pipelines are difficult to build, but once they're built, they expand. And it's easiest to expand gas pipelines. And where we finally got a breakthrough this year, admittedly after 10 years, is we're going to build a 10 BCMA line into Europe that's expandable. There's a competition ongoing right now to bid for it. I'm very confident that a pipeline will be built. What I don't know is who the winning consortium will be. And politicians placing bets politically on which consortium ought to win is not a good idea.
I want very much to continue here. And the problem is that what Steve Warby said, European Union was doing quite a lot of talking and not enough of doing. But here in Europe, we're not distinguishing between the two. And this is part of the problem. Part of the problem was that Nabucco, symbolically, was built as the major political project, which in the imagination of the people was not a business project. It was a political project. Don't ask me what does mean, but Bulgarian voters believe that they know. And now we are learning that there's 3 business projects competing. And this is the problem of the European Union in the way a non-expert sees it. Do we believe that the market can regulate? And how we're going to do it when we know that there are some other countries, China for example, that are not sure that market can do it alone. So they're trying to help the market. And I do believe this is something which is very much the ambiguity of the European position. When we joined Gazprom in something, we discovered that they're a company. When we're not part of the consortium, we are talking about Gazprom as the Red Army. This type of ambiguity cannot continue for too long. And I do believe this type of clarity is going to be very much needed.
There's been a question over here by the gentleman. You'll be first here. Oh, yeah, well, that's okay.
I was given the microphone. Sorry. I have a question for...
If you could just pass it on the gentleman 2 rows in front of you, then after that. And then I have a question over here and over here. Yeah.
Question for Iain, Conn. I'm Charles Grant from the Centre for European Reform. You talked, Iain, about the possibility that Caspian gas could go east rather than west. And the Russians like to scare us. If we're difficult, they often say, well, you better be nicer to us or we'll send it east. At the moment, there's not a single gas pipeline going from Russia towards China. There's one from Turkmenistan towards China. How serious do you think that possibility is, given that the Chinese are not prepared to pay the kind of high prices that Europeans are? Is this Russian bluster, or might they one day actually build pipes to the east and therefore create problems for the Europeans?
Is your question asked specifically to one of the panelists?
Yes.
Okay.
Charles, thanks for the question. Firstly, I was very careful not to say Russian gas going to east. I said Caspian gas. Caspian gas will go east. There is a pipeline in place. The price of gas in China needs to go up in order for more gas to flow down that line commercially. But it's there. What I was saying is, right now we've got this neat idea that the Caspian can be divided down the middle, and everything to the west is going to come to Europe through Azerbaijan and Georgia and Turkey, and everything east of that line is probably going to go east. There is a plan to try and join Turkmenistan to Azerbaijan, but there's a bit of history there that needs to be overcome first. The intriguing thing for me, everyone presumes that if you join a pipeline from Turkmenistan to Azerbaijan, the gas will then come west. If you ask the Chinese, they'll say, if you join those two together, we're going to start bidding for the Azerbaijan gas ourselves. So the point I'm making, I think gas ultimately will come from Russia and the Caspian to China. I think we're going to have to learn how to share Russia's and the Caspian gas with Central Asian and East Asian markets, which is why I believe fundamentally Europe's got to be exceptionally practical in accessing Russian gas and relationships, accessing Caspian gas and relationships, and joining Middle Eastern gas into this system. It's in Europe's interests, and the competition are already hugely active. That's what I meant.
There's a question over here. Where's the microphone? Yes.
Although we speak here about pipelines, I have to put a question. It's about energy, but it's about LNG. Recently, I've seen a very interesting statement coming from Russia about the possibility, when we speak about transiting gas through the Black Sea, the gas to be transited not only by pipelines but also by NLG. So I would like to ask the BP representatives, what do you think about this idea, especially taking into consideration, and Mr. Orban was close to say that also Romania has a project on LNG together with Georgia and Azerbaijan. We are trying to develop the so-called AGRI project, which means using the NLG solution for bringing gas from Azerbaijan to Europe.
So if you're directing that, the first part at me, very briefly, LNG is very important, but it's more expensive to transport gas by LNG than by pipe. And LNG from the Black Sea through the Bosphorus would be a big issue. LNG across the Black Sea is potentially viable, but if you can run pipelines across the countries around the Black Sea, LNG won't compete. So I don't think LNG is a practical solution intra the Black Sea, although I know there are people in this room who will disagree. LNG is important for Europe, and particularly since the United States has now expanded the amount of gas it has available. This means that more of the global LNG will be available for Europe. And I think that's very encouraging.
I'd like to ask first whether LNG, whether there are, opinions that LNG is a viable option for Europe.
It is.
On the panel, yeah.
May I react?
Certainly.
The Romanian's opinion is that the Agri project, which was mentioned, is a very realistic and a very achievable one. Why? Because, firstly, according to our estimation, is the cheapest project, can be achieved in a relatively short period of time. Why? Because infrastructure or part of infrastructure already exists. We have the terminal in Constanța for LNG. As I mentioned, the interconnection with Hungary is already achieved. So I think that it's a question which can be, let's say, put in place, implemented on the medium term. While if we discuss about Nabucco, I think it's about long term. So I think, and this is why we are investing a lot, not only in terms, because when I mention investment, I mention not necessarily only money, but also political, let's say, efforts, the willingness to let's say, to achieve this this project. And for example, with Agri, practically the political will exist. Partially the infrastructure is in place. So I think.
Where's the gas going to come from?
From Azerbaijan and Georgia.
But we are currently the only operators of all the gas that's been discovered that's freely available in the Caspian, and the Azerbaijan government, AIOC, BP, and all of our partners don't want to bring it to a new route because we've already built a pipeline to the Turkish border. So where's the gas going to come from?
So let me remind you that an agreement was signed for this gas, an agreement among the Azerbaijan, Georgia, Romania, and Hungary. It was signed, I think, several months ago.
But that, if I may follow up on this one, it's the question is still viable, if I may say so. That you might have the infrastructure in place, but you have to have something that you have to channel through. And isn't that a problem about the South Corridor in general? We have Azerbaijan, but we don't know yet for sure. What about Kazakhstan? Do we get it really in? We have all these legal issues of the littoral states of the Caspian. How secure are we on the supplier side?
So, as I mentioned, the agreement is signed with Azerbaijan and Georgia, Romania and Hungary. So, and here I think we have clear commitments from Azerbaijan and Georgia that this project will be implemented. So I think at this moment we have no doubts. There are no, of course, uncertainties always exist, but however, while having a legal document, I think we are confident that this project can be implemented.
Go ahead.
I have just a practical idea. We can make an exhibition of all the contracts that have been signed for the last 10 years between the governments of different countries.
Do you think this room would be enough then?
I do believe it's not, because at least our country has been part of a 10 different pipelines that does not exist. But it makes people feel nicer.
Ambassador Jones, please.
I think that the little exchange we've had here on this podium illustrates a key point when you're talking about pipelines, is that you often have two sets of agreements. You have intergovernmental agreements and then you have commercial agreements. And you need both. The intergovernmental agreements usually come first. They provide a framework. But until you have a commercial agreement, you're not really going to see any gas flowing. In terms of your question about Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan is not going to be a major supplier of gas in the next decade. Maybe in the following decade, if Kashgan 2 comes on, eventually there will be gas from Kazakhstan. But we expect that Kazakhstan will probably consume most of the gas it produces domestically. It won't be a major exporter for at least a decade. So you can't count on Kazakhstan to fill any pipelines. I think it's much more interesting to think about the possibility of Turkmenistan. There are some offshore fields in Turkmenistan which are stranded, which could be interconnected with the Azeri fields, and that could augment the Azeri volumes. That's much more realistic in the time frame we're talking about.
Thanks. There's been a question over here for one.
Mohammed Abu Shakra from Egypt. After the revolution, we found that the revolution in Egypt and in many other countries, it wasn't only for political reasons, but we discovered that there is a kind of energy democracy seated. I mean, talks about the price of gas that's exported to neighbor countries in the region were really a question for the protesters. So a group of my friends, we formed an under-establishment political party for renewable energy and sustainable development in the country. But we discovered, and this is my question, that there is no real political awareness among the governors of the country into the use of the energy resources in the country, either renewable or natural gas, for instance. The question is for the ambassador and for Conn. Do you think that there is, after the reform taking place in the Arab world, that there is, from the US and the EU point of view, there is a kind of intentions towards building the capacity of the political leaders for matters related to energy security? Thank you.
Would you like to start?
I can't speak to specific countries in the Middle East, but in fact, the International Energy Agency is very interested in promoting understanding of security issues worldwide. We're focused, of course, more on consuming countries than on producing countries. We have very active programs with China, with India, with Indonesia on emergency response and how they can develop better their energy systems to be more robust to provide for their security. Certainly we'd be willing to work with producer countries, but we haven't really been doing that up until now.
Mr. Conn, you've been
Very
asked this
briefly,
question.
I mean, BP is the largest foreign energy investor in Egypt, and been there for 50 years. We're absolutely committed to your country. The exciting thing for Egypt is that it's got oil and gas. The oil actually tends to be on the east coast, going east from the Gulf of Suez, and there's an exciting new discovery of gas in the Nile Delta. This is very exciting for both Egypt, for domestically, and for Europe. There are already 2 or 3 pipeline corridors across the Mediterranean from Tunisia, Algeria, or Tunisia, Morocco, and Libya, actually, but a small one. I think the probable security conversation on energy is first, does Egypt have enough energy for itself? That's always got to be the first priority. And then, if there is enough natural gas, probably LNG into Europe is the most practical thing. But we are engaged with your country on this. In fact, the UK Prime Minister went down to Egypt 3 weeks ago, and our CEO has already been down to talk to the new government about energy strategy.
Thanks. There's been a question over here.
Smaller Policy Institute for International Affairs. I am with the Center for European Studies here in Brussels. The question is, we are in Brussels after all, and I would like to ask you about the importance of the third energy package of the European Union. We've been talking about interconnectors. Just to give you an example, I probably would expect me to speak about Poland, but between Spain and France, there is one very narrow interconnector. And if there are problems with the gas coming from the south, France immediately might feel the pinch. So the question is about the single market, which is one of the priorities of the Polish presidency, and it's also about energy. Because we find ourselves in our relation with our friends and partners in Gazprom of paying the second highest price in Europe. 30% more than Germany pays for the same gas. So the question is, how European are we here?
Is there someone you wanted to direct your question specifically to? Or Mr. Conn, well, you're in high demand, so.
Well, I did help advise the first Barroso Commission on the first energy package. I haven't been involved in the subsequent ones. I think you make an extremely good point, and I think it's a general point about security, which was also mentioned by Leonard, which is security of energy to our borders in Europe is really important. One thing that adds to security is clearly an interconnected infrastructure where you can have gas-on-gas competition, so that Russian gas competes with Algerian gas via Morocco, competes with Egyptian LNG, competes with North Sea gas, and probably the best place you want to be in that circumstance is somewhere around the Netherlands, because you'll probably be able to get the cheapest gas available in Europe. And so I would completely agree we need gas-on-gas competition. We're going too slowly in building the cross-connections inside Europe. This is also true for the electricity market.
Thank you. There's been a question over here.
All the discussions about gas transit is at the end discussion about price and conditions. I wonder what panelists would think about price and conditions of Russian South Stream project, having in mind that it's politically sensitive, environmentally dangerous, and economically just disastrous, 5-7 times more expensive than a rehabilitation of existing gas pipelines. Thank you.
Anyone you're asking this, ask this question specifically? Orban, who of you wants to take this question?
Coming from Bulgaria, we like all pipelines, nevertheless how much they cost.
That has become quite obvious during the panel. Have you figured out somebody who you are handing the bill to then? Have you even figured out somebody handing the bill to them?
For me, the biggest problem with this type of a competition of pipelines is the way it takes place. Because if we're going to be serious also about this energy policy, you're going to see that on one level, European Union should be very strong because it's a consumer who is paying best. But European Union cannot play its strengths because you have the national fears of the different markets. And this different market starts to negotiate directly with the supplier. What basically Gazprom is doing, and I do believe that we should not blame Gazprom for this, this is part of their strategy, they're going and telling, for example, Bulgarians, are you going to be in South Stream or do you want this to go through Romania? Or do you want to have here and there? And all this type of negotiations going very much up. Plus, and let's open this, there is a huge political potential. There is a talk about new jobs. There is a huge corruption potential. The political classes, I do believe, very much living well when there are big energy projects around. And for me, the biggest problem is that we have this talk for 10 years. This is creating a lot of bad blood. Remember the Nord Stream and the bad blood between Germany and Poland. At the end of the day, we don't end up with more regulation and doing things that depends on us. We end up with a bigger and bigger projects, which end up being more and more costly. And from this point of view, Bulgarian government, when there was an attack and saying why you go with the South Stream, why you are not interested only in Nabucco, because Nabucco is a European project, I do believe that part of the answer was quite logical. They said, is not Italy a European country? It's not the European companies which are part of South Stream. This is the basic problem. All of the major Russian projects outside of Nabucco has the support of big European companies. And try basically to pretend that we don't see this, having totally double mind where the European and American businesses have a different view on the situation than European politicians. I do believe this is creating a situation which is very unsustainable, and probably the only one who is benefiting from this is the PR companies, which are basically cashing from both sides.
Well, if you really want to be successful, I mean, these days you have to become a spin doctor. There's been a question from the last row over there.
My name is Niki Zavela. I'm a member of the European Parliament and a member of the Energy Committee. It looks like all the pipelines we've been talking within the committee, they have a supplier, Kazakhstan. So it seems to me that Kazakhstan promises everybody that it will supply them. But anyway, my question is the following to Mr. Conn. Do you find Europe's efforts to exploit and explore its own resources sufficient? Because in the last, the third package, the third energy package we tried to include exploit and exploration within the actions to be taken, and we didn't have a positive reception on this. Do you think that Europe has its own resources instead of depending on Russia? We are bridging up to this. This is good. But now we have the turmoil in North Africa and Middle East. What are we going to do? We have to depend on our own resources. Do we do enough on this? The most recent news was the Leviathan deposit offshore Israel. Is this a serious one? Thank you.
So, I mean, firstly, just a word on geology. A lot of people think that the United States has suddenly just discovered all this shale gas. That's not true. We knew it was there, we just couldn't produce it economically. And technology has suddenly unlocked that. So I think it's quite important that people realize that geologists for the last 100 years have studied most parts of the Earth's surface, and they know where the most likely places for oil and gas are. Now, is there further potential in Europe? Yes, there's further potential in the North Sea for sure. There is also potential on land in Europe, but the data that most geologists would agree on is that there is some further gas in the Polish basin, the Austrian basin, maybe some coal bed methane in southwest Germany, but the quantities that are estimated, because the quantities of coal or the geology is reasonably well known, the quantities will not most likely change this equation. So we will always be import dependent, so we will have to manage both domestic gas and new supplies. We haven't talked about energy efficiency, but that's probably the most important thing we can all do. Finally, your point about Israel, yes, it is serious. There is gas off Israel.
Which means what in connection with Europe?
In the matter of Europe, look, the gas quantities off Israel are probably material enough to change Israel's energy balance. They're not going to be material enough to change Europe's.
Well, to put it in perspective, the two finds off Israel equal Shah Deniz. So they're as big as the Caspian. So if the Caspian's important, Israel's potentially important.
Well, I mean, to be a bit on the magical side where we started in the beginning, if the findings are that big, and it's Shah Deniz 1 or 2. By the way, it's really big. I mean, could you even imagine Israel becoming a gas exporter?
Certainly, they hope to. But you're right. I mean, in terms of Europe's demand, Europe will demand hundreds of billions of cubic meters a year, and import a good portion of that. So no one supplier is the magic bullet, but that's the point. You get more security by diversification, but it means you have to be smart, and it doesn't mean just diversification of your supplies of natural gas. As Iain pointed out, it means doing things like energy efficiency, and it also means doing alternative forms of energy. You can generate electricity with renewable energy. There's a lot of inherent resources in wind and solar in this continent that can be exploited more and reduce the demand for gas.
Which, of course, requires major investments, because these are all big infrastructure investments, or it's major investments in technology, or it's major investments in alternative sources of energy.
Everything requires investment.
But there are obligatory targets in the Union, so there is already legislation, for example, for renewable. There is also Europe 2020 strategy with clear objective established not at the community level but also by every member state, and this have to be achieved during the future, the next 10 years. Yeah. So it is clear it's a commitment. Sometimes it's a legal commitment. So this has to be achieved.
I do believe that there is also something that everybody knows, but we are not talking seriously. One of the major potential, of course, is Russia itself. If the Russia energy efficiency is going to be on the level of the European Union, this is going to be 80 billion per year. And I do believe this is a serious energy conversation with Russia. Basically, you have a very ineffective domestic systems and others, and when people talk about diversification. But part of the problem is that we are so much focused on our small problems, and our fears are so much national, and we so much like the maps and basically to sign contracts with each other about oil and gas that are probably never going to come, that I do believe we are missing these policies which can also change the nature of the energy dialogue. Because I do believe also for Russia, it makes a big difference. 80 billion is not a negligible sum of money, especially after the financial crisis.
Right. The second one. Yeah.
Reinhard Bütikofer. I'm a member of the European Parliament and also sitting on the Energy Committee. Most of this discussion has been about the supply side. I would want to draw more attention to the demand side too. There are studies out there that by implementing state-of-the-art technology, we could reduce gas consumption throughout Europe several times over the hypothetical supply from Nabucco. My question goes to Ambassador Jones. What's your take on this option, and isn't it much more economical to invest into energy efficiency, for instance, in the context of improving the building stock, than investing in all those pipe dreams?
Here we have it, the keyword pipe dreams.
In our scenarios, energy efficiency is the single most important thing we can do to address our energy balances. It's absolutely true. We estimate, for example, if you're talking about reducing emissions, that in the short run, as much as 2/3 of the reduction in emissions can come through energy efficiency. If you go longer out, those numbers drop because you pick the low-hanging fruit first. But even out to 2050, we estimate that 38%, almost 40% of the emissions that need to be reduced to prevent global warming would come from energy efficiency. And those same numbers translate roughly equivalently when you're talking about consumption and security. So, yeah, absolutely. The problem is that a lot of investment in energy efficiency has to be done by individuals. It's hard to put together big projects and to get the investment moving. It's a frustrating area. It's an area we work on. It's an area other energy interested agencies work on. And so far, nobody has found out the trigger, because many of these investments, I mean, we talk about the need for a carbon price, but in energy efficiency, many of these investments are already economic and they're not happening. And we need to figure out as a society how we can make these sensible investments occur. One of the problems is the so-called principal agent problem, which is the individual that has to do the investment isn't the one that benefits from the investment. For example, a tenant and a landlord. If the landlord invests in better insulation for the house or for the apartment, it saves energy, but it's the tenant that gets the benefit. So the landlord doesn't invest because he's not going to reap the benefits. Or you have a situation where a tenant won't invest because I'm only going to be in this place a couple of years, and maybe he thinks it takes 5 or 10 years for the investment to be amortized, and he doesn't want to invest in something that a future tenant will benefit from. So that's the kind of issues that we have to wrestle with. It can be done, and in fact Germany's done a lot, but a lot of other countries could learn from Germany's example.
Thank you.
Also because talking about the money and investment in energy efficiency, and not only, also in infrastructure, I think we have to take into consideration that very soon we will start very tough negotiation at the European Union level in terms of the next financial perspectives. And I think that energy should be included in more substantial than it was before. So I think in a way or in another we have to find let's say resources, financial resources, also to, let's say, to deal with these huge priorities for the Union.
Thank you. There's one last question I would like to take here.
This is Andrew Michta, Rhodes College. A question to Mr. Conn from BP. To come back to shale, especially the Polish-Austrian basin issue, is your assessment that that will potentially not change the equation based on earlier studies? The reason I ask, I believe there are 4 American companies currently drilling in Poland. The yields will not really be known until about mid-2012, if then. And judging by the intensity of the effort, there is at least a potential that there may be a substantial outcome. Could you comment on that when you say that the shale gas will not change the equation of gas infrastructure in Europe overall? Thank you.
Yeah, I should just qualify my 2 earlier comments, because I totally agree with what Dick Jones said. Look, everything changes the equation in its own right. I mean, the question is it going to be material enough to transform the equation? And my comments based on our view of the volumes likely to be present, not the productivity of the wells. I think it's highly likely that technology in unconventional gas will improve and improve. And just to give you an example, in Oman we went down there with a 50 trillion cubic feet reservoir that Shell had discovered and couldn't produce it. We now think it may be 100 trillion cubic feet, and we think we might be able to produce it. Technology will help. I think that all of this domestic gas, and the same with Israel, although I still differ about the quantities, that's a matter of opinion at the moment, all of these things will help change the equation a bit. I don't think it will transform the equation, and we'll still be fundamentally reliable on Russian gas. Will be fundamentally reliable on multiple other sources of gas, and we should encourage them and develop them. And I also agree with the ambassador that energy efficiency is the thing that we seem incapable of talking about properly. If you take cars today, you can double the fuel economy of the world's car park, double it today with today's technology. The problem is governments won't force people to change their cars. That'll change. So I'm actually an optimist, not a pessimist, and I think all of these factors will ultimately help us.
If I could just add a couple of points to Iain's, and I agree with your points as well. When it comes to Europe, it's not just the size of the resource base. It's the ability, and it's not just the technology. It's the ability to get that gas produced out of the ground. And there are 2 additional inhibitions or obstacles that you have to overcome in Europe. One is the legal regimes. In the United States, a lot of people are very eager to see gas produced from their land for a simple reason: they get a share of the profits. Because in the United States, a lot of landowners own their mineral rights. In Europe, very few landowners own their mineral rights. And therefore, if somebody's going to build a well on my land and I'm not going to get anything out of it, forget that. And so there is a much less receptive environment by the landowners in Europe to see gas exploited, because they're not going to get a share of it. That's something that, though, is a regulatory question that could be changed. The other factor is that in the United States, we have a tremendous network of pipelines. Almost everywhere you want to drill, there's a pipeline nearby. So to hook into that network is very inexpensive in the United States. In Europe, the pipeline network is much less developed than in the United States. And therefore, it is going to be longer, or you'll have to go longer distance from your wells to hook into the network, and that raises the cost. So until Europe's pipeline network is better developed, until its regulatory environment is improved, even if you've got the technology, even if you've got the resources, you're not going to get the same impact as in the United States. And I agree with Iain that probably the resource is less. The place that we're hoping will be a game changer, where shale gas could be a game changer, is in China. China has large basins, they have a large market, and if Chinese shale oil takes off, or shale gas takes off, it could substitute for the use of coal in Chinese power plants. That would be huge. Natural gas emits, when it's burned, it obviously emits CO2. But in terms of the power produced, it's half the CO2 from a coal plant, or even less. So that just by switching from coal to natural gas, you can buy a lot of time. And that's what we're hoping for, is that China, which probably doesn't have the same inhibitions from the legal regime as in Europe, and if it has the backing of a strong central government, you could see fairly rapid development in China. Having said that, we're talking 2020 and beyond in all of this. It's not a near-term thing. It took over 10 years for the shale industry to develop in the United States. And it only became known in the last few years, but they've been working on it for a long time. Of course, now the technology is perfected; it'll spread more rapidly. But still, there are a lot of barriers to it, so it's not a near-term fix at all.
Yeah. Politics, pipelines, pipe dreams. I guess we got a glimpse, at least, in the complexities of the issues concerning technology, investment, private investment, geopolitiks, political will, etc., etc. We have obviously a huge to-do list. I will ask, just to wrap up this panel, an impossible task from you on the panel. If you look at this to-do list and the things we've been talking about in the last hour and 15 minutes or something, what will be ranging very high on your top priority list? Very quickly, if you could go from left to right. Ambassador Jones.
Is that me first?
Yeah.
What I said in the beginning, unify the markets. Unify them through regulatory means, through commercial means, and through physical means by interconnections.
I do believe that it's also very important to change the policy debate, but not on the level of the experts, but the public debate. I do believe that there's such expectations being created, and people are so much forced to believe that trade-offs are not going to be done, that you can close nuclear, and also diversify from Russia, and also do this and that, and this is going to come at the same time, not affecting the prices. If this conversation is going to continue, I do believe that politicians are not going to do anything on the must list.
Thank you. Mr. Conn.
Three things. Energy efficiency, which is a major challenge, but we must tackle it. Secondly, energy diversification, because we must do that for security reasons. And the third, the most difficult, is to put the price of CO2 up. And I think there's not enough courage to reduce the number of allocations in the European trading scheme. It's in our economy. If we put that price up to 25 to 40 euros a ton, which might sound like a strange thing for an oil man to want, then we will start to change the dynamic.
Thanks.
I think beyond all what was mentioned, and I fully agree with this, I think solidarity and coordination.
Ladies and gentlemen, you see we do have quite a to-do list. Thank you, panelists, for this very lively debate. Thank you for all your enlightening questions. You will no longer be denied your well-deserved coffee break.
That was a terrific session. We're going to take a 15-minute break now and then come back and talk about the G20.